So in this video I'm going to show you how to use the transfer attributes tool and a really cool tip or kind of little trick that you can do with transfer attributes to sort of work around some of its inherent limitations. So what I've got here is I've got this character that was made for us by Hatch Studios, and I needed to basically take a Max file and rebuild it as a Maya file. So it had this really kind of cool complex rig inside of Max, and I basically brought the character over and started reverse engineering it. So I've got all the skinning work done inside of Maya, and I also went through and set up a bunch of set-driven keys that are driving blend shapes on top of this piece of geometry. So we have a skin deformer and a blend deformer, and that blend deformer has a lot of sort of connections made into it with these set-driven keys to drive it. And the problem comes around when I actually start to turn on the shaders for this guy. So I got to the point where the character was rigged. I wanted to start doing the shader work. I hit my 6 key to turn on my hardware texturing, and I have a mess basically. So if we look at the UV texture window, you can see that essentially what happened is all these UV shells, for some reason, they lost their border edges and it just got all mangled, and I'm really not sure why that happened. Fortunately for me, I actually had a lower res version of this character that came across fine, and I've already done work with it and used it in the past, so I knew that I had this sort of this low res version of this character that had, you know, decent UVs on it. So I think, all right, I'll just use a transfer attributes tool to get that UV data from the low res version onto the high res version, and it won't be a big deal. So if we go ahead and we look at what the transfer attributes tool does, if we'll get both versions on real quickly here, we'll just go ahead and we'll grab that low res guy, and then we'll grab the high res guy, and we'll bring up the transfer attributes tool. It's under the mesh menu. So inside of transfer attributes, there's lots of different types of things you can copy across. In this example, we're just going to be copying just the UV set. So we'll go ahead and we'll say apply. So it basically goes and does that for us. So now you can see we have that nice high-res mesh that's got the new UVs on it that came across from that other character. The problem is when I grab this and I start to move my character around, you can see how sluggish that is. And the reason it's so sluggish is the transfer attributes is actually sort of a live connection. Once you've done that, you can actually modify the high-res mesh underneath the low-res mesh, and it's constantly doing that transfer attribute. So if you look at the kind of stack here on this character, you can see that that transfer attributes is happening after the bind pose, and after, you know, basically it just evaluates, and it doesn't really ever, you can see right here, it just evaluates after the blend shape and the skin cluster. So it's just doing it every time it refreshes a frame. It's transferring. So you lose, you know, all the performance you have in your file. So, you know, I think, all right, well, that's not a big deal. I'll just edit my skin and I'll delete the non-deform history. The problem is, if we do a delete the non-deform history, the transfer attributes doesn't go away because it's actually a deformable object. It's sort of this live connection that's happening. So it's in the same sort of class as a cluster or blend shape, so it doesn't get blown away. So you think, all right, well, how am I going to fix this? And traditionally what I'd probably do is I'd probably just duplicate the skin, delete the history on the skin, transfer the attributes on, rebind it, and copy the weights over from the old, you know, the old object that I duplicated from. The issue with that is if I just copied the skin weights over, yeah, the skin cluster would come in, but I've got all this custom work that I did on those blend shapes sort of driving all this UI into this blend shape node. So, you know, I'd lose all this work, which would really be a pain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a really cool little trick to basically work around the fact that transfer attributes got kind of applied to that already bound skeleton. So this is a pretty cool trick, and you can use it in other areas. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to use the original piece of geometry, which is always hidden, so, or in kind of there in your scene. When you create a skin or a deformed object inside of Maya, you'll have the sort of transfer node, the shape node, and you also have one that's then got the word original in it, or you know, and this is basically the geometry before the deformations. Maya keeps sort of a copy of that kind of hanging out in there, and you're not really seeing it because this intermediate object has been checked. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do that transfer attributes actually on this shape node. So it happens essentially on the original piece of geometry, and then that information gets passed to the deformed shape node, which is this one called base shape. So if we turn on the intermediate object on the base shape, it hides it, basically the same way that this original shape's hidden. So obviously in this example, we'll just uncheck that. So that's the original piece of geometry for any deformations, and this is where we're going to do the transfer attributes now. So if we just hop into our outliner and grab the fast guy that has a good UVs, we'll grab this other dude right here. We'll bring up the transfer attributes one more time, and we'll just say apply. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and look at the stack here, and you'll see that kind of lined up inside of here, we've now got this transfer attributes on this character. Now, like I said, I don't want that history around anymore, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say edit, delete, and this time I'm not saying non-deform history, I'm just going to say edit, delete history, and it will blow away that transfer attribute. So now what I've got is, I've got the original piece of geometry that supplies, you know, where that kind of deformed piece of geometry is derived from with good UVs on it. So all we have to do is just go back into our outliner for the original geometry. We don't want to see that original base shape anymore because it doesn't deform, it doesn't do anything. So we'll turn on the intermediate object switch for that. We'll go back to the base shape, which is the deforming shape, the skin shape, the rigged shape. We'll turn off the intermediate object, and you can see just like that, we now have those UVs on there just the way we want. And if we start to move this around, you can see that it's really nice and fast, and it's got all that sort of work that I did on this kind of control panel that's driving those blend shapes saved for me. So just a really quick use of the transfer attributes tool and how to work around that limitation of it being part of a deformable list and not being able to use the edit, delete, non-deform history to get the performance back. So hopefully that makes sense, everybody, and if you have any questions, just chat up in the bottom of the window and I'll do my best to get back to you all. Thanks again.